In this video, we're going to cover an issue that hits web developers all over. This issue doesn't specifically apply to Firebase users, but as an avid user of Firebase hosting, I do see it a lot. I'm referring to refreshing your site after deploying to production or staging and not seeing your changes take effect. This gets frustrating because it often makes you believe you've done something wrong when in fact your browser is simply caching. So what is browser or web caching? Well, simply put, it is a temporary location on your computer where information is stored for use at a later time. This typically includes web documents, images, and other types of multimedia. The information is stored here to reduce server lag. If the same website is pulled up at a later time and certain conditions are met, the browser may use the stored information to display on your website. And this kind of cuts out the server from having to redeliver information, especially high yield images and video. This obviously has its benefits and helps pages load faster, especially ones that are frequently visited. The downside is that if you are developing a website and constantly uploading to it as you develop, the web cache continues to build and eventually it gets full. How do we deal with it? Well, there are a few different ways. And honestly, hitting F5 is simply not enough sometimes. We are going to go over some of the simplest options. I have a small site here that I'm using as an example site. I'm using Visual Studio Code Insiders Edition, which is a beta version for testing purposes. And I'll leave a link to download this in the description down below if you want to have a look at some of the upcoming features. One of the best upcoming features that I like that's coming out is you'll be able to log into Visual Studio Code with your GitHub account and save your settings across the various devices that you use VS Code. Over to the right here, I'm using Live Server. Okay, Live Server is an extension that exists in the VS Code extension store, and you can click on this link here and then search Live Server, and I already have it installed, but you can feel free to install it, and it acts as a local development server for your projects. And with hot reload and autosave enabled, it saves automatically, and as soon as I click off screen or if I hit Control S over here and save, it will automatically reload the page over here. And then over here I have the link to or the URL for the Visual Studio Code project that we are publishing this to. So oftentimes after my cache builds, or I simply don't empty it for a while, I'll see development changes in Live Server, but when I deploy it to staging or production, the changes don't take effect. So I'm going to make a small change here, and we'll see how this works. Okay, and we'll see the change immediately in Live Server. And now I'm going to go ahead and deploy that to Firebase. And over here, if I simply hit the F5 key, we may see it update, we may not. And like I said, I recently unloaded my cache, so it is loading properly right now. But that doesn't happen for everyone. The F5 key is a function key that when pressed will simply refresh your page. And if you're lucky, any changes will take effect immediately. If your cache is full, you will start to run into the kinds of problems that I had discussed previously. However, if you're using Incognito or private mode, you generally won't run into that issue. The next option is a hard reload. There are a couple ways of accomplishing this with Chrome on Windows. The first way is to touch Shift Control R all at the same time. It's basically the same thing as pressing F5, but the cache will revalidate everything during page load. It looks for 304 responses, which is not modified responses. The browser doesn't clear the cache, but it doesn't use anything in the cache when making the request. If the browser doesn't have to re-download cached JavaScript, images, or text files, then it will. The other way to do a hard reload is if you go into Chrome DevTools. This does have to be open for this option to work. You can go through hard reload by long pressing this refresh icon here and then coming down to hard reload. And when that happens, then it reloads the page, but in the fashion that I had described. The next option is to use an empty cache and hard reload. This is something that Chrome DevTools does have to be open for. If the cache is empty, then obviously it's going to have to do a hard reload. It needs to re-download everything. And that's exactly what happens. However, if the page makes any after-the-fact downloads via JavaScript that were not part of the original page load, then these still might use the cache, which is why emptying the cache helps, because it makes sure that these won't use any cached files. The next option is working out of incognito or private mode. Working in incognito mode is a way of browsing without storing your browsing history, site data, or any information that you've entered using any forms like credit card data or first name, last name, sign up forms, that sort of thing. It does, however, allow you to bookmark items, and any item that is downloaded is saved to your device or cloud option, whether you're using incognito or not. It is worth noting that incognito does not hide your web activity from the site you're visiting, your employer, or school, or internet service provider. So how do we get to incognito? Well, there's a couple different ways. One way is to go up to the ellipsis up here and go down to new incognito window. Another way is to use Control, Shift, and the letter N, which will bring up an incognito browser that way. And if you want to, let's say if you want to run all of your projects in live server out of incognito, previous to VS Code settings updates, you had to open an incognito window and then paste the link from your development site into here, and then you would have access to developing your site in incognito. However, with an update to settings, you can simply go to Preferences, Settings, and then if you search Live Server, and you scroll down to Live Server Settings Custom Browser, you can choose whether Live Server will open in Chrome, Chrome Private Mode, which is incognito, Firefox, Firefox Private Mode, Microsoft Edge, or I'm not sure what these other two options here are. But if it's private mode, and then close your settings, and then when you open your site using Live Server from this point on, it will automatically open in an incognito window. And another option that we can use to disable the cache and make sure that we're getting fresh page while we're developing is through Chrome DevTools. You can disable or enable the cache in here, and the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and open up Chrome DevTools, and we'll jump over to the Network tab, and this is your cache enabling or cache disabling option here. This allows you to see the caching behavior and determine whether or not you're caching and where that cache is. This option is also great for developing applications that utilize the user's local cache. So as you can see here, it's currently uncached, or I'm sorry, it is caching. Okay, this is unchecked. So the cache should be enabled, and it's looking for any 304s. The 304 is the not modified response because the cache is enabled. It's checking to see if anything has been changed, and in this case, it has not. Now, if I click Disable Cache, and then I click this again, you're going to notice a series of 200s. It's not going to be looking for any modifications because there's no cache to check it against. It's essentially been disabled. And now we get all 200s. Okay, now I'll go back over here to enabling the cache and I'll refresh it again. And you'll notice that here in the size column, we have a disk cache and a memory cache. This is likely because this is a hard-coded file, and this is pulling from a Google Fonts API. So these are two different types of caches. So again, if I disable the cache and we refresh that, then you'll see a series of 200s. And if I undisable it and continue to refresh it, then we can see that it's looking for a modified response. The last option that we'll discuss is cache busting by appending variables to your style sheet or your JavaScript file. You can do this manually, but experienced developers will often turn to something like Webpack or a batch file process to both minify and add cache busting file names to any supporting dependency files on your site. If you're doing it manually, you can simply take a style sheet, for example, and add a question mark, version number as an example, and add version 1. Okay, and then the next time you release it, you can add version 2 if you make any changes to it. It should be noted that you would not make this change on the file name itself. You would only make it to the reference to that file in your HTML file. And then once you deploy that, and we'll go into the source code. Once it's been redeployed, okay, we reloaded it, and now we will go into here, and you can see that the version number has changed, or I've appended a version number to it. It has not changed the styles. The site still looks the same, but it has appended that version number. The style sheet itself still looks the same as it does in here. Well, I hope this video was helpful to you. Some of the things that we went over today was all about caching, what it is, why it's important, and why it can be bad, ways to update your page without much effort. And these ways include the F5 key and a simple refresh, a hard reload using Control-Shift-R. In Chrome, you can empty the cache and do a hard reload. In working in incognito mode and how to update your settings in VS Code to automatically open in incognito, and disabling caching through Chrome DevTools, as well as cache busting by appending variables. As always, please leave any comments down below. I will leave some links to various resources in the description. Please like and subscribe for more videos, and I will see you next time.